I think a Chinese equity bull market is starting. Foreigners are just waking up to it. Domestic investors are just waking up to it. We're in the process of mending that confidence. And so I actually think that the government's 5% target is achievable. I am optimistic on China. Again, I think it's the most competitive economy in the world. I think that's a fact. It's not an opinion. It is the start of an important bull market in China. I think we're going through a very, very important shift in narrative, both amongst domestic investors and foreign investors when looking at Chinese equities. Now, China essentially dominates every industry in the world, even at the very pinnacle of technology. I think this is why DeepSeek matters. DeepSeek shows that even at the very top of technology, China can compete with the West or even go above the West. And so this gives a lot of comfort to the leadership. It's like all of a sudden, the fears that China's growth could be contained by a Western blockade are essentially gone. And so now we're entering into a new phase where the leadership keeps talking about boosting domestic consumption, about boosting the domestic consumer. And if you want to do that, the simplest way to boost confidence, because what China suffers from is a lack of confidence. One way to boost confidence is to get a stock market bull market going. And I think that started last in basically February 2024. So it's a little over a year's old now. And for a year, Chinese stocks have been moving higher. I think a Chinese equity bull market is starting. Foreigners are just waking up to it. Domestic investors are just waking up to it. Flows are starting to pick up, but it's just the beginning of a story that should last many years. I'm sure you've heard this saying that bull markets climb a wall of worry. That's what bull markets do. You have all these concerns and the bull markets just drive through them. And I think that today you're seeing this. It's very typical behavior where everybody focuses on the negative because we've had 3-4 years of really bad stock markets. So everybody focuses on negative. It's like, this isn't going to last. Real estate, bad news. Confidence is so bad, etc. But the markets just continue to move ahead. It's very, very typical of how bull markets evolve. When you have to be worried about the bull market is when everybody thinks it's going to keep going higher. When everybody says, sunshine every day, ice cream for breakfast, when everything is awesome, that's when you have to worry about the bull markets. And in China, to your point, we're not there. Now, there's no doubt that the Chinese economy's had basically 5-6 really rough years. Some of that was self-inflicted. To be honest, the COVID lockdowns lasted for too long and really shook people's confidence. Now, the reality, though, remains that if you take a step back, China's economy today is by far the most competitive economy in the world. And you see this through Chinese trade numbers. China's trade surplus keeps on making new highs every single month. China's trade surplus right now is about 90 billion a month, US dollars. It's no country has ever run a trade surplus this big. And it's a real testimony to how competitive Chinese businesses are. And you take any field, you take automobiles, you take industrial robots, you take train building, power plant building, solar panels, batteries, you name it, China's at the top of the global game today. And to the point where very few can compete. When you start off with that, like what should be happening is all the people making money selling solar panels, selling batteries, selling all the things that China's selling. They should be taking that money and reinvesting it at home or consuming. But because their confidence has been crushed, because people are so afraid, they just do one of three things with it. They either take that money and leave it at the bank, and the banks, because there's no demand for credit, the banks have nothing to do but buy bonds, and bond yields go to new lows, option one. Option two, they buy gold. And then the third thing they do, if they can, is they keep that money abroad. So you look at Hong Kong, US dollar bank deposits in Hong Kong have grown by $250 billion over the past couple of years. It's just enormous amounts of money. Now, if the Chinese government manages to boost people's confidence, both the businesses and the individuals, the money is there and the money keeps coming in, 90 billion a month. So I think we're in the process of mending that confidence. And so I actually think that the government's 5% target is achievable. So really very few people have traveled in China in the past 5 years, which is crazy because it's obviously the second biggest economy in the world, and it's still growing, decently. Just walking around the streets, there's so many car brands that didn't exist 5 years ago, 10 years ago, producing really high quality cars and at very, very affordable price points. So the Western world has completely missed out on this story. I keep saying, look, you have to go see China. You can't underestimate how much it has changed in 5 years on so many different fronts, because it's not just the manufacturing, it's also the fintech. I wrote this piece about a year ago now called, Prejudice in China. People are holding on to past prejudices. They might have gone to China 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And back then, China was an economy that essentially produced cheap goods cheaply. It's like it was, China quality was seen as inferior. For a lot of people, if you haven't been to China in the past 5 years, that's what they're still stuck with. It's a frame of reference that has been bypassed. The assumption I think most Westerners have is it's communist, therefore it's going to fail because all the other communist countries have failed. Now, I always say, well, look, the interesting thing today about China is the CCP has been in power longer than the Soviet Union existed. China doesn't feel like it's collapsing at all. You're getting better trains, you're getting, less pollution, you're getting airports being built everywhere. China now is even producing its own plane. China's sending like missions to the dark side of the moon. So I think there's communist element is a big part of that bias. I do tend to believe as well that, look, in the Western world, we have this conception that people from Asia can't be creative, that it's almost like we have a monopoly on creativity. We're always surprised when Asians do better. And so I think we have this tendency to always underestimate the resiliency and the hard work, frankly, of Asians. And, today, it's amazing. I was being interviewed by an American TV channel. And one of the first questions they asked was, yeah, but there's no creativity in China. And I said, how'd you figure? Like, they're producing better cars. They're producing better movies. Like, go see Ninja 2. It's like it's the world's highest grossing cartoon. But people hold on to these prejudices long after they're proving to be not true. You can't understand the Chinese progress, the economic progress, the growth that you've seen, etc., if you don't understand the level of competition that most Chinese businesses have to deal with. To be a successful businessman in China means that you're going through just insane levels of competition. And if you don't run twice as fast as the next guy, you're not going to win. If you look at the US, it's like, okay, they decide to do electric cars. So essentially, they tell Ford, GM, and Tesla, we'll give you big subsidies to do electric cars. And then GM and Ford fail and Tesla succeeds. And the end result is you get Teslas for $70,000 and Elon Musk gets to be worth $100 billion or whatever the number is. In China, capitalism works differently. In China, okay, you know what? We need to produce electric cars. And then what happens is that every local party secretary, every mayor, every provincial governor says, I'm going to call my bank and I'm going to say, hey, Agricultural Bank of China, I've got a local car producer here. You need to give him loans so he can start producing electric cars. And before you know it, you have 130 car producers in China. And it becomes what I've come to call the Hunger Games of capitalism. And this is what happens in industry after industry. But the end winner is actually the consumer. Because the consumer, instead of having one guy who's worth $100 billion like Elon Musk, what you end up with is many car companies. And the consumer in China today has a wide choice of cars that are much cheaper than cars anywhere else in the world, and sometimes now much better than cars. And this is how capitalism is supposed to be. More competition. Capitalism isn't supposed to be one or two companies like Microsoft, Google, Tesla that control an entire industry and make super fat margins and end up in a quasi-monopoly situation and then spend a bunch of money lobbying the government to maintain their quasi-monopoly situations. That's not what capitalism is about. Capitalism is about companies fighting it out. And yes, like sometimes making very, very slim margins. Now, that's part of the equation. The other part of the equation is a government that does deliver on infrastructure needs. So it does deliver on the roads, does deliver on the railroads, does deliver on the airports, and basically on the backbone that you need to have a modern economy. It does deliver on the electricity grid. And now a lot of people say, oh yeah, but they've overinvested in this, et cetera. And that's probably true. But I think if you're the Chinese government, you say, okay, we're never going to hit it quite right. Like we're not going to hit the perfect number for investment. So do we want to overinvest or do we want to underinvest? If you underinvest, you end up with power outages, which means that you're then hurting industry. It always makes sense to overinvest. So the whole system in China is built towards always excess competition and excess overinvestment. That's how the system works. But that's how you get a lot of progress, and that's how you take out, whatever it is, 600 or 700 million out of poverty. So I think like nobody had China catching up on AI as quickly as they've done on their bingo card. It's been a very rapid development. I think it's very exciting. It highlights a number of trends. One of the reasons the US was so successful was you had the whole Silicon Valley ecosystem, right? And it seems pretty obvious to me now that there's a whole ecosystem in Hangzhou. You look at all these companies that are coming out, they seem to be all in Hangzhou now. You have a whole ecosystem in Shenzhen. So you already have like 2 Silicon Valleys now. China has caught up on AI. China hasn't yet caught up on semiconductors, but clearly the government is throwing money at this. It's throwing human resources at this. When you look at pretty much every major semiconductor company in the world, whether TSMC, NVIDIA, Broadcom, AMD, now Intel, they're all run by people of Chinese ancestry. Now, maybe Taiwanese, but so very clearly there's something in the Chinese culture that like works well with semiconductors. So I think China will catch up. Now, look, I've been thinking for more than a year that it's Chinese equity is the place you want to be today. Look, the way I look at it, Chinese equities right now are still not very expensive. They have massive government support because bond yields are very low in China. Retail investors are taking money out of the bank. Like you're earning 0% at the bank. You're still getting good dividend yields on a lot of stocks. So the gap between dividend yield and bond yields is close to record highs. And you've got strong momentum now after a lot of bad momentum. So, you go through your checklist. It's like, okay, good valuation, good momentum, good policy support, good earnings yields. It's like check, 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 check. If you don't buy now, when are you going to buy? So I am optimistic on China. Again, I think it's the most competitive economy in the world. I think that's a fact. It's not an opinion.
What do you guys think? Do you have anything to add on top of this conversation? Please leave your comment below. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you for making it this far. If you like this video, you might want to share it with a like-minded friend. Thank you, and as always, stay blessed.